Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope everybody stayed for this conversation that we are about to have because it is super, super interesting. I am super happy to be here talking to Uli, who you heard before, and Monica LoCascio, who is an artist that I work with very close, and Jairo Alexis Rodríguez, who is a physicist and professor of the National University in Colombia. And we are going to have a conversation around the layers of information and the beauty in science and art and what lies beyond that beauty. So I would really like to ask Monica to tell us a little bit about herself. Hello, Monica.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to share my screen to give you all a little intro to my work. Okay, can everyone see? Thumbs up? Great. So yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Monica LoCascio. I'm an artist based in Vienna, Austria. I have the great pleasure of sharing a studio with Daniela Brill. We actually worked together for the first time. Daniela and I, with Uli, who curated us into the amazing exhibition at the Naturhistorisches Museum in Vienna that opened 2 years ago, that was based on the Hubble. And so I wanted to start this presentation with the piece that I did for that exhibition called The Great Wall. It was a large sculpture, steel and plexiglass, where I took data from the Boss Great Wall, which was the largest supercluster ever discovered in space up to that point. And I made drawings based off the astronomical data and turned those drawings into slices of plexiglass. So it was a bit of an abstraction from the actual astronomical maps to talk about how the galaxies were interacting from afar, even though they're millions of years apart, we don't really know if they're coming together or moving apart. The structure is so far away. A lot of my work has to do with how theory and philosophy and mathematics and even biophysiological processes that are unseen, also energetic experiences, these unseen forces and phenomenon, how those could be expressed geometrically or these days more with fiber and grown materials. So I am really interested in the unseen and things that we can't really comprehend. So I guess my way of understanding things is to try to put form to them, and that's where a lot of my work comes through. So these are just some details from that piece, The Great Wall. After working on that piece, I really wanted to get back to working with my hands. This piece was, as I mentioned, was steel and plexiglass. So I worked a lot with fabricators and metal and very hard laser cutters, lots of hard material. And so after that, I really wanted to get back to something textile and tactile. I've worked with embroidery and fiber my whole life, basically, since I was a little girl. It's something that was very soothing to me and something that I always loved. So I started doing embroidery again after that piece, and that's when all of my theory and all of my kind of artistic enthusiasm, it all just came together in this wonderful way. So I've been working with embroidery since then. This piece in particular that you're looking at with half-opened eyes is a geometric exploration, so to speak, of a concept called precession by one of my favorite, you could call him a philosopher, an architect. His name was Buckminster Fuller. And his theory on precession was how amazing things come out of left field when we're on our way to a goal. So these kind of unseen energetic forces again. And this was my geometric exploration of that. This piece is a piece that I actually started when I was at Cern with Suratómica last year. I had the great pleasure of going with a few artists and with Daniela, and we spent a week there getting to know the scientists and checking out the machinery. And this piece was based on that visit, and it was kind of my way of working out the discovery of gravitational waves. How these very, very slight and very, very hard to capture modulations in space noise were this very powerful discovery of kind of evidence of the Big Bang. So this was one of the last pieces in the series that I did last year, and that was based on that. This is a close-up of the interior. And so after working with those kind of processes and that very kind of strict motif of the chevron, I moved on to working with a few new embroidery, what's the word I'm looking for, methods. So I've been doing a lot of testing this year after that series. These are just a few pieces in process that I'm working on at the moment. I'm getting more and more into more 3D. I'm starting to use hair, and that's all very exciting. But the thing I'm most excited about right now, and I can't show a lot of it because it's actually for my thesis project, which will be shown in January at a space here in Vienna. But I'm now working more with materials. I'm doing a lot of research, and I'm growing my own textile but with bacterial cellulose. So this kind of skin-looking textile that you see on the board is grown with bacteria and yeast, and I'm experimenting with hair and metal and wood and things that kind of hold memory and transmit electricity. And I'm actually growing a 2.5 by 1.5 meter piece of bacterial cellulose, which I think is the biggest in the world that's ever been made, according to my research. So that's where I'm at now, and short and sweet, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Monica. I think we will have a lot to talk about your work in a couple of minutes after Jairo shows us his research around the connection between art and science. So I will give him the word first so he can present his ideas, and then we will talk about your piece and Uli's thoughts. Hello, Jairo.
Hello, thank you, Daniela. Thank you to organizers for inviting me to this interesting conversation. Well, first of all, I am a physicist, and I am working on particle physics for many years, and I am part of the LHCb Experiment right now with a small group in the university. So I'm going to share my screen right now. Where is here? To comment some things. Well, I apologize. My slides are in Spanish, but well, this is about symmetries. Is basically. Well, in general, numbers, patterns, symmetries are present in nature, and is a fact well recognized since very old times. But physics is about nature, how to describe nature in a precise way. Things like mathematics is the language used by nature, and that's why physics looks like mathematics. But I have to mention that it's not completely true. Mathematics is only a tool that describe the natural phenomena, but sometimes rules are not followed as mathematicians do. So physics is about intuition, and it's about reality. It's about how to describe that reality. So during the 20th century, two big theories emerged. That was general relativity and quantum field theory. And these two theories change our view of the universe in a very deep way. Our conception about time, about space, and about matter have changed. During the last 100 years, a very important concept in modern physics has arisen up, and it is the symmetry. Symmetry is important because symmetry appears in many places, is closely related to the concept of beauty, appears in the art, of course, appears in music, appears in mathematics. So here are some examples of that in a butterfly, the reflection in nature. In music, some scales that use Bach, the symmetries in the sphere that is very used in physics and in mathematics, and some examples of reflections and transformations of symmetry with a picture. So, but the point is that in the last century, symmetry was emerged as a paradigm in physics, and it's because symmetry is related to the dynamics of the phenomena of the theory, is related with the conservation laws that is very important in physics. For example, the momentum conservation is related with the translational symmetry. The angular momentum conservation is about the rotational symmetry, and the conservation of energy is related with the time translations in physics. So the symmetry is become the guide to understand the nature. So this is why symmetry is very important. But symmetry in physics is about groups in mathematics. The theory of the groups is the main theory behind all this stuff. So right now we have a very successful model. This is called the standard model of particle physics. This model is about the fundamental particles. Here we have the quarks, and we have the leptons that we recognize up to now as our fundamental particles in the universe. And also the standard model of the particle physics involve three of the four fundamental forces: the strong force, the electromagnetic force, and the weak force. So this is the up to now the symmetry that we can call the fundamental symmetry, and this is the group that we express mathematically. But this symmetry, it seems that is the fundamental symmetry in the universe. But the question is, and the big question is, if this is the final and the ultimate symmetry in the universe. And that question is the main question right now in physics. 50 years working on that, and up to now we don't have a very concrete answer. So this is the model. Quarks, lepton forces. Behind of this is the Higgs boson, the last discovery of the Cern experiment. So this model looks like the very successful and is based on the concept of symmetry behind that. So, but the surprises are coming from the experiments in astrophysics, for instance, that say that our universe is about dark matter, is about dark energy, and is very important, and we don't know too much about dark energy and dark matter. So now new ideas, we need to understand the universe as we are seeing. So we need new original ideas, and I think that this link between art and science is more important right now than ever, not only to help us to understand the ideas and the theories that we are already built, but also to explore new concepts, new approaches to our reality. I think that art is in some sense about how to understand and how to interpret the reality, and is not different of the final goal of science. Thank you.
Thank you, Jairo, very much. What I especially like about what we have heard so far is that there are so many scales behind every investigation that arts and science have, the layers beneath the surface. So Uli is also here. I think I'm going to present you very shortly, just in case somebody missed your amazing presentation, which everybody should see anyways. This is Uli Kufna. She is an astronomer and an artist, and she is a collaborator of Suratómica since the very beginning of the project. And Uli just gave a very nice talk about her work in astronomy, explaining a lot of concepts that I think Jairo was also kind of referring to in this last image that he showed, and about her ways of making art out of the machine-made mistakes. So this is very, very interesting. I would like to also say how interesting it is that we have all three scales in what I have seen of your three investigations. We have the space scale from Uli, we have the human scale from Monica, and then the particle scale from Jairo. So I'm very happy to have you three here. And Uli, I don't know if you want to say a couple of words before we continue.
Hi. Yes, it's me. Okay. Well, I would like to reiterate my pleasure and thanks to Suratómica that I can be part of this fantastic endeavor. I'm saddened that we couldn't meet in person, and I'm hopeful that we will be able to do so hopefully next year at the in-person Suratómica Festival. The art pieces that I will present all evolve around me being a human being making mistakes and finding science as the perfect presenter of this, of finding empathy in the data, in the science, etc. But as an astrophysicist, as Daniela said, I work on the largest scales in the universe, on how galaxies evolve. It's kind of has to do with where did we come from, where are we going, those big questions, and finding my own little place in there. That's a really a big deal for me.
Thank you, Uli. Well, since you talked about it, I wanted to ask Monica specifically if and how does the mistake have a role on your creative process? I would like to go a little bit deeper in this idea of mistake and truth or error or false. So what is this mistake concept in your creative process?
Sure. I guess I have a life philosophy that mistakes are not bad. I think we learn more from making mistakes than we do from doing a good job or completing something without error. So with my embroidery, especially the ones where I'm examining like more kind of complex topics or complex geometries, I am making repetitive micro movements and using a motif that can be quite small over and over. And if I make a mistake, I tend to leave it because mistakes change the geometry. And as that extrapolates out into the larger design, these mistakes have ripple effects, just as they do in our life. And it's always interesting to me to see what happens to a piece when I leave the mistake in and keep going from there, because it can change the whole piece. But I actually end up learning a lot more about kind of the underlying structure of something or how everything fits together when I keep the mistake in and I keep working with it. That goes for my geometry. It also happened quite a bit with the Great Wall piece for the NHM. I made tons of mistakes, but every time I felt like it was actually the best thing that could happen, because I learned more, and I see Uli nodding. I mean, I'm sure you can agree, like when we make a mistake like that, it's like, oh, great. But you have to do
liberating. Yes.
Yeah.
I absolutely second that, and I think we're on the same page here. It's liberating, and that our culture's fear of making mistakes, it's really tough one, especially for the sciences. We're in the business of making mistakes. We are supposed to help the other people coming after us not making the same mistakes. Yet it's so hard to admit, hey, I went wrong here. I think it's wonderful that you showcase and highlight being a human being in your artwork. Sorry I interrupted you. Back to you.
Yeah, and I guess just to finish it out, bringing it back to the human being, my work at the moment with bacterial cellulose and hair is all about trauma in the body, and a lot of that in this work is expressed through how the bacterial cellulose tears, how it's repaired, and just from a deeply personal perspective, the trauma that I've experienced in my life or that others experience, it really turns us into who we are, and we have that opportunity to work with it and heal, or not. So I think that the idea of mistakes or things that go wrong can actually, they're quite powerful.
Yeah, so my next question goes directly to you, Jairo, about the same topic, because you talk about symmetries and being a physicist and being a particle physicist and knowing like these exact numbers and measurements and how everything needs to fit perfectly in the formula and in the theory, so it fits with the universe. It's like the universe is perfect, so the formula must be perfect. What do you think about these mistakes in symmetry, in physics, in this layer or sphere or scale of particles?
Okay, well, I think that science is also made by humans, so humans made mistakes, and also in science we made mistakes. But I think that science is built on how to describe the nature in the most precise way that we can. So we try to get better and better models that fit in the better way the phenomena that we are seeing. So that's the accumulative way that we are building up the science. So in general, we have made mistakes in the history of science, but we have a very big guide. This is the experiment. So we have the experiments that say what is correct and what is not correct. So that's our final goal is to get this fit with the experiments and say, okay, this is the right thing or the right way to do it. In another way to express about symmetries, we have as I mentioned 100 years thinking about symmetries in the universe, but now we have big problems with that because we are in a street without not ends in this sense. So we are built a lot of models basic with different symmetries, but we have still problems trying to understand dark energy and dark matter and things like that. And so there are many problems without answers, and symmetries seems like is not the answer. So maybe it's time to think in a different way. So maybe we are in front of a big mistake that, well, was useful right now for 100 years, but maybe it's time to change.
I have so many feelings and thoughts about this. One is the first thing you said, you have the experiments to deliver the truth or to get rid of those mistakes. I think there is the experiment, and then there are the measurements that you take of them. And so what I argued in my presentation is that there's a lot of room for some errors in the measurements because of the instruments that do the measurements, because of the person that reads out and interprets it. So even though the experiment or nature might be doing its thing, there's so many steps in between that are just paved with possible, I'm going to say mistakes, but there's so many other ways to explain what I mean, so many ways of being off a little bit, and then from there you might go a completely different path and roll and just go on with that. So some of you might be familiar with this concept of Occam's razor, which is that in mathematics, the easiest answer is usually the correct one. That's a very quick summary of it. Now there is something called Occam's broom, which was invented by the molecular biologist Sidney Brumer, I think. Scribbled it there. Yeah. And this is Brenner, that is, who invented this term, Occam's broom. And that is that whether by accident or because we're still learning or because on purpose, some fact is absent, something is missing, and that's just swept under the rug, meaning it gets overlooked, it doesn't get published because it's, in the debate that is science, it is embarrassing or it's just misleading. I mean, I'm sure, Jairo, that you have in your career had panic moments thinking, I went wrong here. I mean, I have that all the time. And so it's so easy to just sweep it under a rug. and it happens because we are human beings, and it happens to reading out the machine, etc., etc. I don't know where I'm going with this, but that was one of the immediate thoughts that I had. Experiments are well and good, but there's a lot of steps to get to an end result. And you are right. The dark matter might not be the answer, and there could be other. And there is a public debate on this, right?
Right. I think also that the experiments with time are very complex. For instance, in particle physics, as you know, the data analysis is very complex. It's not just to look a very right number. We have a lot of data, and we have to extract the information of that, and we have many assumptions that in the process that sometimes you say, okay, are you seeing that really?
Yes, and we are pattern recognizers. Our brains are just constructed to find things, patterns in the noise that may be misleading too.
Yeah, right. And also that dependence of the theory, because for instance, in particle physics, we need the theory to compare the experimental results. So without theories, we don't know how to do that.
Yes, and a very similar idea that I'm working with in both art and science is this notion of a truth that is expressed through a simulation or a model. So where you put into a machine all those equations that are supposed to describe the universe in a way that a computer can actually deal with it. And then you run it and you see how the universe evolves. And then you take an observation that is full with faults, with some errors and mistake from the instrument, and compare that to the reference truth which you yourself put into a machine, and then try to go forward after that, whereas both things have inherent some human step. So this is a really interesting kind of fight for me. What is the truth if all of it is also speculation? But I do want to also, sorry, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I want to say that maybe some interpretations, and maybe we can try different approaches to the interpretation that we have used to do these experiments so complicatedly right now.
Yes, and so what I wanted to bring Monica in by saying that, you know, when you are growing your experiment or your art piece, I want to know how it is to grow something. Is it for you in your studio? Is it the same as creating something, or is it like an experiment? Can you tell us more about this growing?
Sure. I think it's both. It's an experiment to see if it actually works. I did tests on a small scale before I did this giant 400 liters of liquid to grow this giant piece. I was afraid that my apartment would collapse or the studio would collapse. There was a lot of trial and error. It took a long time. And for me, it does feel like an experiment. It feels very connected to the work that I'm doing, which a large part of what I'm thinking about right now is how the body makes its own truth, and how our body is actually an incredibly sophisticated measurement tool and a very sophisticated observational tool. And when you both were talking about how, you know, the data that you put into your tools or how you make your models, you know, this is all biased because we're humans putting the data into these algorithms. That, you know, what is this information that's going to come back in our models? Well, yes, it is a model because it's maybe inherently flawed in the beginning. And I'm really interested in this kind of separation between people who think and feel and experiment with their body, which is how I work with the world, and people who kind of have this hierarchy that the tools and the microscopes are maybe more powerful, or the absolute truth, whereas something that someone understands intuitively or viscerally is not as worthy. And I'm looking to challenge that. So to go back to the growing piece, it's interesting to me to work this way because it's kind of an external it's an externalization of how I'm growing and understanding truth in my own body. It feels like I've taken something outside of me and put it in this big pool of sweetened bacterial tea, and watching how that evolves. So yeah, I'm really interested in the kind of the organic algorithms, right? How we understand what's around us. And the truth that comes out of that, whether it's true or not, or whether it's real or not, and who gets to decide what that is.
Exactly. Yes. So this notion of the human person biasing the experiment. I mean, that is or even the measurement. That's super interesting and influences every aspect of science. And this idea that there's a hierarchical classification of perhaps what's more useful, I mean, that is absurd. And that also is inherent to art and science, and the idea that perhaps the sciences are higher up because they're more useful, because we get the World Wide Web and computers and toasters with it, and art is just pretty. This is a very dumbed down version of a argument that I'm sure you've all heard over and over again. But I, like you, think that it is really valuable to examine this overlap of where's the human in making art and science.
And I see a similarity, I don't know if you see it too, in almost the history of art, how it evolved from these pictures that you were showing us from Escher before, this very mathematical art, and Monica's first embroidery pieces that you showed us that were like with this mathematical geometry that you chose, and you wanted to do it like that, like over and over and over. And I remember it was like a meditation. You sat down and you did and the same system, and it was so beautiful to see. And then it grew out to become this organic material, like that it grows how it wants to grow, something like that, you know. And then I look in science, and this fear of mistakes, how Uli was calling it, and how science has evolved by looking at these mistakes as well. I mean, how you were saying, Jairo, this we believed that it was the correct theory until the new one came. You were talking the other day about this Ptolemy's, is it called like that in English? I think so, yes. Theory of the how everything revolved around us, and then you know, like everything. So it is like a very organic process from the very stiff beginning that we think this is it, and then we go to this place of thinking, okay, but we're humans, and we don't even know if we are in the middle of between the particle and the universe, because we don't know what's inside of the particle, and we don't know what's outside of the universe. So we don't know the scale, and we cannot think once again that we are the center of the universe in the scales, like between the particle and the universe. So I just wanted to state that I find this very clear connection between how Monica's work evolved, and then how this thought evolved of, okay, we are humans and we are the ones creating the algorithm. Of course, now we are in a time where artificial intelligence and machine learning is so important. It is the future. It is in the future of humanity to see how machines evolve and create the knowledge that but the machines are man-created, are humanly created. I mean, I say, you know, like it is like we are creating it. We are making the first step. So the first step could be full of mistakes. So I just wanted to say that, and to Uli, you want to comment on that, and Monica too, and okay, thank you.
Yes, so I second that, of course, and we have a lot of complex, multidimensional problems in the world right now, and there is no one answer for it, right? So the machines, or the machine learning that you just mentioned, again, yes, it may be the future, and everything looks like it will be. Also, what we're experiencing currently is this denial of science, this manipulated truths, these fake news, something like machine learning, where you hand over the decision making to an algorithm, is tricky, I think. Again, connecting this to the black box discussion of yesterday's Suratómica Festival discussion, there is a lot of room for misinterpretation here if you don't know how the decisions are made. It's really tricky, and I think if you have all these complex questions, you need to explore multiple ways of answering them, and the machine is one of them, and the body experience is another one of them. So they should all operate together, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I think, we were talking about mistakes before, and what came with Jairo's presentation in Escher in particular is you see in his drawings this kind of basic form, this very basic, binary white and black form that through his drawings is extrapolated out into 3D and gains detail and becomes this fuller picture. And I think that to speak to what I think Uli you were saying earlier too, and Daniela what you were saying, we just have our current model of reality and the current model of truth, but that's not the end all be all. We're continuously discovering and we're continuously making mistakes. And these mistakes add complexity to what we know. These mistakes give us this more space within which to think about what we are researching or learning about. And so every time we hit a mistake or we learn something new, of course, it just becomes fuller and it becomes more complex and we get a bigger picture. So I do think that ties back to this idea that mistakes are should be celebrated because we're just learning more about the complexity of something we didn't maybe expect.
Well, I have to say that coming back to the notion of scales that Daniela mentioned, I think that we are all the time with our scale. So we have the experience of our realities about our scale. So I think that maybe it's important to listen another perspective, as Ulrike said about coming from art, for instance, in order to understand the other scales. But it's very difficult for us in the human scale to imagine how is working the microscopic or the macroscopic scale. So at scales large, at the astronomical scales, is for us is completely is difficult to imagine. And also the microscope in the atomic scale is completely different. So if you say, okay, let's go to imagine a nanoparticle. So maybe the number is okay, but try to imagine in atom, a nuclei and the electron far away, and the scale is very difficult to imagine. So how is working at the microscope, at the atomic scale, and how is the working the universe scale is very difficult to imagine. So I think that the other perspectives coming from, for instance, from ours is interesting to understand or try to imagine how these scales are working right now and help us to really understand that we are saying in the theories.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very important to help comprehend the world we live in and the skills, as you say. One thing that I also want to mention here that I want to bring to the table to this discussion, given Suratómica is also sort of a political platform in a sense, is that while I find making mistakes liberating, and so does Monica, I think, and we want to celebrate making mistakes publicly and not be so afraid of them, although that's really hard if you identify with your work in such a level. I think that, democracy has never been as elastic as it is now. There's a lot of double standards. That's not even a taboo anymore. Ethics, justice, equality, all of these things are so delicate aspects that we tend to leave out of the science-making operation, endeavor, but they are part of it, and there are so many more layers of making mistakes. For example, leaving out a whole group of people to give their opinions. We look at the science results from. I come with my baggage of my Western culture and the way I grew up and the way I understand memory and whatever. But another person with a completely different background might interpret it in a very different way, or the analysis may be completely different. So this whole idea of science being a social endeavor as well, I think is, I just want to comment this here because it ties in to mistakes, in my opinion, too. And for Monica, I mean, you are putting your own body and personal experience into that. How does that look like for someone who comes from a completely different background, or someone who never has the opportunity to get the same information that you have or that I have?
Absolutely. I think about that a lot, and especially this year, the privilege that I have in my skin, where I live, how I live. I think thinking about the primacy of the body and the truth of everybody's experience is a direct opposition to fascism, patriarchy, colonialism, gender inequality, all of these forces that are really prevalent right now. They always have been, but they're brought up in a major way at the moment because of all of the issues that we're facing globally, climate change, COVID, all of that. So to be able to kind of come back to our own body as a source of power and truth and certainty, and to kind of encourage that in everyone, and to maybe talk about how to feel safe in one's body when it seems almost impossible because of what's going on, and when there's so many forces outside of us that are saying, you don't get to say that, or you don't know what you're talking about, or you're not worthy, or you're not allowed to be heard, or you don't have a platform. I think it's important to have that conversation about who's allowed to talk and who is taken seriously. And I think especially that's something that I react to a lot in the scientific community, or the scientific academia, the hierarchy of the value.
Because I feel like the arts are the perfect language for that, to bring the pitch up, to really, to, in a non-didactic way, just scream it from the top of the lungs if something needs to be heard. The sciences have very limited means for that, and can put the papers out, and we've known about climate change for a very long time, but then you have massive pieces with where the arts are just a perfect language to communicate it, to make people realize how it feels.
Absolutely. I think, but still within the art world, there's a huge hierarchy. Women are notoriously underrepresented, yes, but when you bring in people of color and, quote unquote minorities in the world, their art is even less represented in the canon. And, there's many, many instances of, white male artists who have work that is, celebrated and shown all over the world, but it's kind of derivative of a woman or a Black artist who's been doing it for years. And I could throw in a few examples, but I'm not going to. It's just, it's kind of everywhere.
Well, that is something that the arts and the sciences have in common, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Well, we've been talking in the last weeks with Suratómica about how complex the whole system is. I mean, everything and how everything kind of fits together. So we have 5 minutes left, and I just wanted to say that everything we've been talking about here belongs to the same complex reality, and that is just amazing that it's all part of it. So we have 4 minutes left. I would invite you to say your last thoughts around these super important topics, and I really hope that we can someday get together and talk about this for hours, because it is enough to talk about for hours.
Okay, should I make a start with the last words and then the other? Okay. So I find it very difficult to really categorize what art is, how it functions, what science is, how it functions for me and what I do, although I do know what to do in each of them, but there is a connection, of course. And also one can never predict the ways in which it will affect other people. How it will change people's minds or influence their decisions. Some might need the art input, and this has an effect on their behavior, some the sciences, but it is never a waste of time to pursue something you're drawn to. So combine both, do both if this is what you're drawn to.
Well, I have to say as a final word that art and science are made by humans, and I think that this is the main link between art and science, that humans are behind of all this stuff, and we make mistakes, we make art and we make science, and we have to be responsible for all that we made. Thank you.
I love, Uli, what you just said, and Jairo too. I completely agree. You know, and I think it wasn't until recently that art and science were divided. You know, these were they were considered kind of the same thing for a long time. It's a recent split, and I think that this kind of compartmentalization of those things is a symptom of our modern world and having to silo everything. But art and science is really just this fancy word for human curiosity, right? Like we're always discovering and we're always trying to learn more about ourselves and the world. So I think we're all artists and scientists, and we can all just stay open and in community and in conversation, and maybe we'll get through this crazy time that we're living through. And thank you for having me here.
I'm also very, very thankful for the three of you joining me today in this last panel of the Suratómica Festival. And thank you for making this conversation so rich in topics and in layers and everything possible, that I can really conclude that everything is so connected and complex that there is no particle without gender studies, and there is no universe without mistakes. So very, very thank you very much for being here and for contributing to this creation of knowledge and platforms and everything. I hope we stay in touch.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.